Eleanor Whitmore lived a life that seemed perfect from the outside. But inside, she carried secrets that weighed heavily on her heart. Her home was a grand estate nestled in the hills of Los Angeles, complete with sprawling gardens, marble floors, and windows that framed breathtaking views of the city below. To anyone who met her, Eleanor appeared to have it all: wealth, success, and influence. But behind her confident smile and tailored suits lay a woman burdened by memories she had tried for years to bury. Eleanor's journey to becoming a millionaire wasn't easy. Born into a modest family in a small Midwestern town, she grew up watching her parents struggle to make ends meet. From an early age, she learned the value of hard work and determination. After finishing high school, Eleanor left her hometown with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. She worked multiple jobs while attending night classes, eventually earning a degree in business. Her big break came when she invested her savings in a rundown apartment building no one else wanted. With grit and vision, she transformed it into a desirable property, selling it for a hefty profit. That first deal marked the beginning of her rise to wealth. As her empire grew, so did her reputation. Eleanor became known not just for her sharp mind, but also for her generosity. She donated millions to charities focused on education and housing, often visiting schools and shelters to see firsthand how her contributions made a difference. Yet despite her outward achievements, Eleanor remained guarded, keeping people at arm's length. Friends admired her strength but sensed there was something she wasn't sharing, a sadness that lingered beneath the surface. What few knew was that Eleanor's greatest regret dated back to her teenage years. At 17, she had fallen deeply in love with a boy named Marcus, whose charm and kindness had swept her off her feet. Their relationship blossomed quickly, but when Eleanor discovered she was pregnant, everything changed. Marcus disappeared without explanation, leaving her alone to face the consequences of their whirlwind romance. Terrified and ashamed, Eleanor confided in no one, not even her parents, and decided to give the baby up for adoption after giving birth. The day she handed over her newborn daughter was the hardest of her life. The nurse placed a tiny silver locket around the baby's wrist, a keepsake Eleanor hoped would remind her child of the love she felt, even if they were apart. As she watched the nurse walk away with her daughter, Eleanor vowed to build a better life for herself, believing it was the only way to honor the sacrifice she had made. Over time, she threw herself into work, burying her pain under layers of ambition and achievement. But no matter how much money she earned or how many accolades she received, Eleanor couldn't escape the emptiness inside. Late at night, when the world was quiet, she would think about the daughter she gave away. What did she look like now? Did she have a happy life? Did she ever wonder about the mother who let her go? These questions haunted Eleanor, shaping her into the enigmatic woman she was today, a woman whose polished exterior masked a heart yearning for redemption and connection. The evening of the charity gala began like any other event in Eleanor's busy social calendar. Dressed in an elegant emerald green gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, she walked into the grand hall of the downtown art museum with grace and poise. The room buzzed with conversation as guests mingled over glasses of champagne, admiring the modern art exhibits displayed around them. For Eleanor, these events were a mix of networking, philanthropy, and obligation, a chance to maintain her public image while supporting causes close to her heart. But tonight felt different, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. As she moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging polite pleasantries, Eleanor's eyes wandered. She scanned the room absent-mindedly, taking in the glitz and glamour of the evening. That's when it happened. A flash of silver caught her eye from across the room. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the light reflecting off someone's jewelry. But as she looked closer, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing among the group of young volunteers assisting with the event, was a girl wearing a pendant that looked eerily familiar. It was a small teardrop-shaped locket, simple yet distinctive, hanging delicately from a thin silver chain. Eleanor froze, her mind racing back decades to a moment she had tried so hard to forget. The memory hit her like a wave. The day she placed that very same locket around her newborn daughter's wrist before handing her over to be adopted. Her heart pounded as she stared at the girl, unable to look away. Could it really be? Was this some kind of cosmic coincidence, or was fate playing a cruel joke on her? Eleanor's thoughts swirled as she debated whether to approach the girl. What would she even say? "Excuse me, but do you know where you got that necklace?" It sounded absurd, even in her head. Still, something about the girl drew her in. Not just the locket, but the way she carried herself. She had a quiet confidence, a warmth in her smile that reminded Eleanor of, well, herself. Or perhaps more accurately, the person she used to be before life hardened her. Summoning her courage, Eleanor took a step forward, then hesitated. What if she was wrong? What if the locket meant nothing at all? She glanced around the room, trying to distract herself, but her gaze kept drifting back to the girl. Finally, she decided to take a less direct approach. Picking up 2 flutes of champagne from a passing waiter, she made her way toward the group of volunteers. "Good evening," Eleanor said warmly, offering one of the glasses to the girl with the locket. "You all seem to be doing wonderful work here tonight." The girl accepted the drink with a polite smile. "Thank you. We're happy to help out. My name's Tessa Monroe, by the way." "Eleanor Whitmore," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. "And what brings you to this event, Tessa?" Tessa explained that she was a college student majoring in social work and loved volunteering for causes that supported underprivileged communities. As they talked, Eleanor found herself hanging on every word, searching for clues, any detail that might confirm or deny her suspicions. Tessa mentioned growing up in Chicago, being raised by adoptive parents who encouraged her to give back to others. Each piece of information sent Eleanor's mind spinning further. By the time their brief conversation ended, Eleanor knew one thing for certain. She needed answers, whether Tessa was connected to her past or not. The sight of that locket had stirred something deep within her, a longing she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. As she watched Tessa walk away, Eleanor realized this wasn't just another glamorous night in her privileged world. This was the beginning of something far bigger and possibly life-changing. The encounter at the charity gala lingered in Eleanor's mind long after the event had ended. She replayed every moment of her brief conversation with Tessa, analyzing each word and gesture for hidden meaning. The girl's smile, her voice, the way she carried herself, everything about her seemed to echo fragments of Eleanor's own personality. It was unsettling yet impossible to ignore. The more Eleanor thought about it, the stronger her conviction grew. There was something undeniably familiar about Tessa. Over the next few days, Eleanor found herself distracted, unable to focus on work or even enjoy her usual routines. Her mansion, which once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed hollow, its vast spaces amplifying the storm brewing inside her. She paced the halls late at night, her thoughts consumed by questions she couldn't silence. Could Tessa really be her daughter? What were the odds that someone unrelated would wear the exact same locket, a piece of jewelry Eleanor hadn't seen since the day she gave it away decades ago? Desperate for clarity, Eleanor decided to dig deeper. She began by discreetly asking around about Tessa, hoping to gather more information without raising suspicion. A friend who helped organize the gala mentioned that Tessa was a volunteer known for her kindness and dedication. "She's always helping others," the friend said. "You can tell she has a big heart." Those words struck a chord with Eleanor, reminding her of her own youthful idealism before life forced her to grow up too quickly. Still, second-hand details weren't enough. Eleanor needed proof. One afternoon, she sat at her desk, staring at an old photo album she kept locked away in a drawer. With trembling hands, she opened it to a page she hadn't looked at in years. There, tucked between faded photographs of her teenage self, was a picture of the tiny teardrop locket wrapped around her newborn daughter's wrist. The image brought tears to her eyes, but it also strengthened her resolve. If this pendant truly belonged to Tessa, then the connection between them wasn't just a coincidence. It was destiny calling. Determined to learn more, Eleanor hired a private investigator, giving him strict instructions to handle the matter delicately. For weeks, she waited anxiously, checking her phone constantly for updates. When the report finally arrived, Eleanor pored over it with a mix of hope and dread. The investigator confirmed that Tessa had been adopted as an infant by a loving couple in Chicago. Even more striking, the timeline matched perfectly with Eleanor's pregnancy, and the description of the baby's belongings included a silver teardrop locket. The evidence was overwhelming, leaving little room for doubt. Despite the confirmation, Eleanor hesitated. How could she approach Tessa without seeming intrusive or desperate? She wrestled with guilt, wondering if revealing herself would bring joy or upheaval to the girl's life. After all, Tessa had grown up surrounded by love and stability, something Eleanor had sacrificed to provide. Would dredging up the past only cause pain? Her internal struggle came to a head one evening as she stood on the balcony of her mansion, gazing out at the city lights. The weight of her secret pressed down on her chest, heavier than ever before. She realized she couldn't keep running from the truth, not when it might mean losing the chance to reconnect with her daughter. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor made a decision. She would reach out to Tessa again, this time with honesty and vulnerability. No matter how difficult the conversation might be, she owed it to both of them to try. As dawn broke over the horizon, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't alone. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. Seeing Tessa again wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about building a bridge to a new beginning. Eleanor's decision to hire a private investigator was driven by a mix of desperation and hope. She needed answers, but she also feared what those answers might reveal. The days waiting for the report felt like an eternity, each moment stretching longer than the last. She tried to distract herself with work, poring over real estate contracts and attending meetings, but her mind always drifted back to Tessa. Who was she really? And could she truly be the daughter Eleanor had given up so many years ago? When the investigator finally delivered the findings, Eleanor locked herself in her study, shutting out the world as she read through the details. The report painted a picture of Tessa's life that both comforted and unsettled her. Tessa had been adopted shortly after birth by a kind couple in Chicago who ran a small bookstore. They weren't wealthy, but they provided a loving home filled with books, laughter, and warmth. Tessa grew up excelling in school, showing a natural talent for leadership and compassion. She often volunteered at local shelters and community centers, traits that reminded Eleanor of her own younger self. But it was the mention of the locket that sent shivers down Eleanor's spine. According to the report, Tessa's adoptive parents had told her that the teardrop pendant was one of the few items she arrived with when they brought her home from foster care. It wasn't just any locket. It was the same one Eleanor had chosen with such care all those years ago, a symbol of her love and sacrifice. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. This couldn't be a coincidence. Somehow, against all odds, fate had brought her daughter back into her life. Despite the mounting evidence, Eleanor wrestled with doubt. What if she was wrong? What if approaching Tessa only caused confusion or pain? She knew how fragile identity could be, especially for someone who had grown up without knowing their biological roots. Tessa seemed happy and well-adjusted. Would revealing the truth disrupt the life she had built? These questions haunted Eleanor, keeping her awake at night as she weighed the risks of stepping forward. Still, the pull to act was stronger than her fear. Eleanor began crafting a plan, determined to approach the situation with sensitivity. She decided to invite Tessa to lunch under the pretense of discussing scholarship opportunities for students like her. It was a safe excuse, one that wouldn't raise suspicion, but would give them time to talk privately. As she drafted the invitation email, Eleanor's hands trembled. Every word felt heavy with meaning, loaded with emotions she wasn't ready to express just yet. In the days leading up to their meeting, Eleanor rehearsed what she would say. practicing phrases in front of the mirror until they sounded natural. Yet no amount of preparation could calm the storm inside her. She questioned whether she was doing the right thing, whether she deserved to intrude on Tessa's life after staying silent for so long. But deep down, she knew she couldn't turn away. Not now. Not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. On the morning of their lunch date, Eleanor dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that balanced professionalism with warmth. As she drove to the restaurant, her heart raced with anticipation. For years, she had wondered about the child she gave up, imagining what she might look like, who she might become. Now she was about to meet her face to face, and nothing could have prepared her for the whirlwind of emotions that awaited her. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. This meeting would change both their lives forever. The day of the lunch arrived, and Eleanor could barely contain her nerves. She arrived at the restaurant early, choosing a quiet corner table where they could talk without interruption. As she waited, she fidgeted with the napkin in her lap, glancing toward the entrance every few seconds. Her mind raced with possibilities. How would Tessa react? Would she be open to hearing what Eleanor had to say, or would she shut her out completely? When Tessa walked in, Eleanor's breath caught for a moment. The young woman looked radiant in a simple yet elegant blouse, her confident stride masking any hint of nervousness. When their eyes met, Tessa smiled warmly, and Eleanor felt a pang of familiarity that nearly overwhelmed her. It was as if she were looking into a mirror, seeing glimpses of her younger self reflected back at her. "Thank you for meeting me," Eleanor said as Tessa settled into the seat across from her. "I hope this isn't too much of an inconvenience." "Not at all," Tessa replied politely. "I'm always interested in opportunities to help students like myself. Plus, I enjoyed our conversation at the gala." Eleanor nodded, grateful for the small talk that eased them into the meal. They ordered their food, exchanging light pleasantries about school, career aspirations, and shared interests. But beneath the surface, Eleanor's thoughts churned. She knew she couldn't delay the real reason for their meeting forever. As the main course arrived, Eleanor decided it was time to steer the conversation toward deeper waters. "Tessa," she began hesitantly, "you mentioned at the gala that you were adopted. Do you ever think about your biological family?" Tessa paused, her fork hovering midair. For a brief moment, she seemed taken aback by the question. But then she relaxed, setting her utensils down. "Yeah, sometimes," she admitted softly. "I mean, I've always wondered who they are and why they made the choices they did. My adoptive parents have been amazing. They've given me everything, but there's still a part of me that feels incomplete, you know." Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat tightening with emotion. Hearing Tessa speak so openly stirred something deep within her, a mix of guilt, pride, and longing. "I understand," she said quietly. "It must be difficult not having those answers." "It is," Tessa agreed, "but I try not to dwell on it too much. Life goes on, right? Besides, I figure if they wanted to find me, they would have done it by now." Her words struck Eleanor like a dagger. She had spent years convincing herself that giving Tessa up was the best decision, that staying away was better for everyone involved. But now, sitting face to face with the daughter she had longed for all these years, she realized how wrong she might have been, how selfish it had been to make assumptions about what was best for someone she didn't even know anymore. Summoning every ounce of courage, Eleanor took a deep breath. "Tessa," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "what I'm about to tell you may sound strange, but please hear me out." Tessa tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Okay." Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out the old photograph of the teardrop locket wrapped around a tiny wrist. Sliding it across the table, she watched as Tessa picked it up, studying it closely. Recognition dawned on her face almost immediately. "Wait, this looks like my necklace," she said, touching the pendant around her own neck. "It is your necklace," Eleanor confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "Because I gave it to you when you were born." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and palpable. Tessa stared at the photo, then at Eleanor, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Eleanor clasped her hands together tightly, bracing herself for the weight of her confession. "I'm saying, I'm your mother, Tessa. You're the baby I gave up for adoption all those years ago." The room seemed to freeze as the words sank in. Tessa's eyes filled with tears, mirroring Eleanor's own. Neither spoke for several moments, the air charged with raw emotion. Finally, Tessa broke the silence. "Why now?" she asked, her voice shaky but steady. "Why come forward after all this time?" Eleanor exhaled slowly, tears streaming down her face. "Because I couldn't stay away any longer," she confessed. "Seeing you again, it's like fate brought us back together. And no matter how scared I am, I knew I had to tell you the truth." As they sat there, two strangers bound by blood and history, the foundation of their relationship began to take shape, not with anger or rejection, but with vulnerability and hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they were ready to face them together. The revelation hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and electric, as Eleanor and Tessa sat across from each other at the restaurant table. Both women were crying now, their tears mingling with the unspoken weight of decades apart. For a moment, neither spoke. Words felt too small to capture the enormity of what had just been said. Tessa clutched the photograph tightly in one hand while absently fingering her locket with the other, as if trying to ground herself in reality. Finally, Tessa broke the silence. "I don't know how to feel," she admitted, her voice trembling but honest. "Part of me is relieved, I guess. Like there's this missing piece of me that suddenly makes sense, but another part feels angry, confused. Why did you give me up?" Eleanor flinched at the rawness of the question, knowing it was fair but dreading having to answer it. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to meet Tessa's eyes. "I was 17 when I had you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lived in a small town where everyone knew everything about everyone. When I got pregnant, I didn't have anyone to turn to. Not my parents, not the boy who fathered you. He left before he even knew about you." She paused, gathering her thoughts, her hands gripping the edge of the table for support. "I was scared, Tessa. Scared of being judged, scared of failing as a mother, scared of ruining your life, because I didn't have the means to give you the future you deserved. Giving you up wasn't easy. It destroyed me. But I thought it was the only way to ensure you'd grow up safe, loved, and cared for." Tessa listened intently, her brow furrowed as she processed Eleanor's words. "So you just walked away?" she asked, her tone softer now, but still tinged with pain. "You never looked back?" "I wanted to," Eleanor confessed, her voice cracking under the weight of regret. "Every single day I wondered about you. I imagined what you might look like, who you might become. But I convinced myself that staying away was better, that I'd only complicate things if I tried to find you. I was wrong, though. So wrong. Seeing you today, hearing your voice, looking into your eyes, it's like staring into my own soul. I should have found you sooner." Tessa wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her expression shifting from hurt to contemplation. "It's hard to hear that," she said after a long pause. "But I think I understand. You were young, alone, and scared. That doesn't make it less painful, but it helps me see why you did what you did." Eleanor nodded, relief washing over her face despite the lingering sadness. "Thank you for saying that," she murmured. "You have no idea how much it means to me." As the initial shock began to fade, they started talking more openly, sharing pieces of their lives with each other. Tessa told Eleanor about growing up in Chicago, describing her adoptive parents' kindness and the values they instilled in her. She talked about her love for helping others and her dreams of becoming a social worker, a career path inspired by her desire to give back to communities like the one she grew up in. Eleanor, in turn, shared snippets of her journey, the struggles of building her real estate empire, the loneliness that came with success, and the guilt that shadowed her every achievement. "I threw myself into work because it was easier than facing the truth," she admitted. "But nothing I'd done has ever filled the void of losing you. Not money, not fame, not anything." By the end of their conversation, the tension between them had softened, replaced by a fragile yet undeniable connection. They weren't strangers anymore. They were two people bound by blood, history, and the shared ache of years lost. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Eleanor reached out hesitantly, placing a hand on Tessa's arm. "I know we have a lot to figure out," she said softly, "and I won't rush you into anything. But I'd like to get to know you, if you're willing." Tessa hesitated for a split second before nodding. "I want that too," she replied, her voice steady now. "It's going to take time, and there will probably be moments when it's hard. But I think we owe it to ourselves, and to each other, to try." Walking out of the restaurant together, they both felt a glimmer of hope piercing through the shadows of their past. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, Eleanor felt whole. And Tessa, though cautious, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, finding her biological mother could heal wounds she hadn't realized were still open. In the weeks that followed their emotional reunion, Eleanor and Tessa began navigating the complexities of their newfound relationship. It was a delicate process, filled with moments of joy, vulnerability, and occasional tension. Both women were determined to make it work, but they quickly realized that reconnecting after so many years apart wouldn't be as simple as flipping a switch. They needed patience, understanding, and a willingness to confront the emotions that had been buried for far too long. Eleanor suggested they start by attending therapy sessions together, a safe space where they could unpack their feelings without judgment. At first, Tessa was hesitant. Therapy wasn't something she'd ever considered before, and the idea of sitting in a room with a stranger while discussing such deeply personal matters felt intimidating. But Eleanor reassured her, explaining how much she wanted to do this the right way, to honor Tessa's experiences and not rush the healing process. Their first session was awkward, as both struggled to articulate their thoughts. The therapist gently guided them, asking questions that encouraged reflection. "What does forgiveness mean to you?" she asked at one point, turning the question over to each of them. For Eleanor, forgiveness meant earning back the trust she had broken by giving Tessa up. For Tessa, it meant letting go of the anger and confusion she'd carried for years, even though she hadn't fully understood why. Over time, these sessions became transformative. They learned to communicate openly, sharing stories from their respective lives, and slowly piecing together a fuller picture of who they were. Tessa spoke about growing up in Chicago, describing the love and stability her adoptive parents provided while acknowledging the lingering questions about her origins. Eleanor listened intently, marveling at the strength and resilience her daughter had developed despite the challenges of her early life. For her part, Eleanor opened up about the hardships she faced after giving birth, young, alone, and burdened by shame. She described the sacrifices she made to build a better future for herself, only to realize later that success couldn't fill the emptiness left by losing her child. Hearing her mother's perspective helped Tessa see her not just as the woman who gave her up, but as a flawed human being who had done the best she could under unimaginable circumstances. Outside of therapy, they spent weekends getting to know each other in more casual settings. One Saturday, Eleanor invited Tessa to her estate, giving her a tour of the sprawling gardens and elegant rooms. As they walked through the house, Eleanor pointed out little details, like the library filled with books she never read but kept because they reminded her of dreams she once had. Tessa noticed how much thought Eleanor put into making the space feel warm and inviting, despite its grandeur. They also explored Los Angeles together, visiting art galleries, hiking trails, and local markets. During one outing, Tessa laughed as Eleanor tried a slice of street food for the first time, wrinkling her nose at the spiciness. These small, light-hearted moments helped bridge the gap between them, reminding them that beneath the weight of their shared history, They were simply two people learning to connect. Of course, there were still difficult days. Tessa sometimes found herself questioning whether reconnecting with Eleanor was complicating the identity she had built with her adoptive family. Was it disloyal to embrace another version of her past? Eleanor, on the other hand, worried constantly about overstepping boundaries or pushing Tessa too hard. Each misstep brought tears and frustration, but it also deepened their commitment to working through the pain. By the end of their first month of rebuilding their bond, they both felt a profound shift. Tessa no longer saw Eleanor as a distant figure tied to a painful chapter of her life. Instead, she began to view her as a real person, flawed, loving, and genuinely remorseful. And Eleanor, for the first time in decades, felt like she was finally reclaiming a piece of herself that had been missing all along. As they sat together one evening watching the sunset, Tessa turned to Eleanor with a smile. "You know," she said softly, "I think we're going to be okay." Eleanor reached out, taking her daughter's hand in hers. "I think so too," she replied, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. Though the scars of the past would always remain, they had begun to heal, not perfectly, but authentically. Together, they were proving that love, when nurtured with care and honesty, could transcend even the deepest wounds. Months had passed since Eleanor and Tessa first reunited, and their bond had grown stronger with each passing day. What began as a tentative connection born out of uncertainty had transformed into something real, a mother-daughter relationship built on trust, forgiveness, and mutual respect. They weren't just piecing together the fragments of their shared past. They were creating new memories, ones that would shape the rest of their lives. The day of Tessa's college graduation was a milestone neither of them could have imagined when they first met at the charity gala. Dressed in her cap and gown, Tessa stood proudly among her classmates, beaming with accomplishment. Eleanor sat in the audience, her eyes glistening with tears as she watched her daughter walk across the stage to receive her diploma. For Eleanor, this moment was bittersweet. It was everything she had hoped for her child, but never thought she'd witness firsthand. After the ceremony, Tessa spotted Eleanor waiting near the entrance, holding a bouquet of flowers. "You didn't have to do this," Tessa said, hugging her tightly as she accepted the gift. "I wanted to," Eleanor replied, smiling through her tears. "You've worked so hard for this, Tessa. I'm so proud of you." Tessa's adoptive parents joined them shortly after, warmly embracing Eleanor as if she were already part of the family. Over lunch, they reminisced about Tessa's childhood, sharing stories that painted a fuller picture of the life she had lived. Eleanor listened intently, grateful for the love and care her daughter had received. She realized then that Tessa's journey wasn't defined by loss or separation. It was enriched by the people who had shaped her along the way, including herself. In the months that followed, Eleanor continued to support causes close to her heart, but her focus shifted. Inspired by her reunion with Tessa, she became an advocate for open adoptions and organizations that helped reunite separated families. She often spoke publicly about her own experience, emphasizing the importance of compassion and understanding for birth parents and adoptees alike. Her story resonated with many, offering hope to those navigating similar paths. For Tessa, reconnecting with Eleanor brought a sense of wholeness she hadn't known she lacked. While she remained deeply grateful to her adoptive parents, meeting Eleanor allowed her to embrace another layer of her identity. She decided to dedicate her career to helping children in foster care, drawing inspiration from her own journey. "I want kids like me to know they're not alone," she told Eleanor one evening, "and that no matter what happens, they deserve love. Always." Their weekends together became cherished rituals. Whether it was cooking meals in Eleanor's kitchen, taking long walks along the beach, or simply sitting side by side reading books, they savored every moment. There were still challenges, of course, moments when old wounds resurfaced or when communication faltered, but they faced them together, determined to keep moving forward. One evening, as they strolled through Eleanor's garden under a canopy of stars, Tessa stopped and turned to her mother. Do you ever think about how different things might have been if we hadn't found each other? She asked. Eleanor paused, considering the question. Sometimes, she admitted, but I choose to believe that finding you wasn't just luck. It was meant to happen. Maybe we needed to go through everything separately so we could truly appreciate being together now. Tessa smiled, linking her arm through Eleanor's. I think you're right, she said softly. We've come so far, haven't we? Yes, Eleanor replied, her voice filled with quiet certainty. And we're just getting started. As they walked back toward the house, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, it was clear that their story wasn't just about loss or redemption. It was about the power of love to transcend time, distance, and even mistakes. Together, they had proven that while the past may shape us, it doesn't define us. What defines us is how we choose to move forward. And for Eleanor and Tessa, the future looked brighter than ever.